As we slide into June of 17, the Germans repositioning, but they found one thing. This hex which the French had advanced into, they launched an attack there, no advance, drove them out, only did 4-3 in losses, but basically it's just trying to halt this, trying to make it harder for the French to get their grasp on there. That was just one short of breaking the French situation. So if the French lose another strength point, another demoralization point, they're going to lose replacement points coming up. But they do get their... If they had lost this one point, they wouldn't have gotten as many supplies this start, which could have significantly affected their ability to continue an attack, because they don't have that many. I'm not sure they want to continue. They've lost their entrenchment prospects in this space, for example. It's going to be a hard call. The English got another shot in the arm with the extra supplies. They were able to do a 2-hex attack with some French aid, artillery aid, to blast up to the Somme. I think the Germans have to withdraw. I think they have to pull out of the... The problem is, I don't see that working. I think the Germans will still be in retreat across the Somme after this. I think they're in trouble, but they cannot keep stretching their line. So far, they've been able to keep it pretty tight. They've been able to keep it reasonable here. But if this breaks, their line is going to stretch to ridiculous extents. So they have to focus more and more strength up in the north, push up, try to pull back to the Hindenburg line. I think it's the only answer here. So we're going to see a massive retreat and some fresh terrain, and the French will be able to push forward at no cost. So the decision to withdraw is made, but that doesn't make anything trivial immediately. The Germans had to pull out of this hex. Otherwise, they'd be abandoning whatever's there. They have to slowly fall back to the Hindenburg line. They can't just jump there. And that opened up what it looked like an opportunity for the French. They launched an attack on the hex, not terribly effective. And the Brits, being particularly bloody-minded, launched another out-of-supply attack, very little artillery supply added in, and against this hex, basically what they're looking at is breaking that Somme line before it gets established. They do not want to face a wall there, but they've got a danger. That line's not being dug in over here until after, it hasn't even started being dug in. So next month will be an available time as well. And they kind of, I think, overreached with the attack here. They took 15 to 11 losses and didn't dislodge anything. They weren't using their armor. No real advantages there. So they're not making it any harder on the Germans. They're hurting themselves on this, and that was probably foolish. But once I commit to an attack, I kind of go through with it, just as a matter of, geez, I've counted everything already, fuck it. Alright, so the Germans have pulled back to the Meuse, or Moise, no, the Marne line. Sorry. Not all the way back to their Hindenburg line. They don't think they have to pull that back that far. They don't want to give up terrain that's unnecessary. There's a slight advantage to Hindenburg hexes, but they still see that as a fallback. So now enabled them to put some more strength into the line against the Brits. Nothing additional against the French, but they feel like they have them kind of hampered at this point. And they can direct more resources down that way. This line is a little weak because it isn't entrenched yet, but it's not terribly weak. With a +2 or a -2 bonus on them, they have as much of an advantage as trenches give. It's just not as strong a line as they abandoned, but it's somewhat smaller in frontage. That should be sufficient to help tremendously, and once they do dig in, it will be a stronger line. One of the issues with this game, for me, when I play the big strategic, say a Third Reich or a WF or something like that, it's just apparent to me that I can't hold something. right? This, because of the slower advances, the way things aren't going to be these major breakthroughs, it looks like, yeah, I can hold on a little harder. I don't have to pull back. This isn't a bad thing. This is World War I. But it was much more difficult for me to fall back in this than it would be in a World War II situation where the risks seem higher. Here it's the risk of losing that one hex. That's what I'm giving up, right? Well, terrain doesn't matter, but it's the risk of the loss of manpower. And key locations. By strengthening this area a little bit, I'm hoping I can stop the Brits. I think the Allied offensive is largely going to be done. We'll see. The French have driven themselves over their limit, though, so they no longer have some artificial barrier. I'm expecting attacks over here and possibly in this range to see if they can push the Germans back further from Paris. And we actually see no follow-up, and most of this is because the terrain's so chewed up along the fronts, even over here in this area. It's just impossible to move stuff to the front quickly anymore until the rail lines are built. Now I'm building these rail lines back here, and you can see I must have succeeded because I have a railroad unit there. It's not absolutely clear to me, and I didn't want to look it up. I've been playing that you can kind of build the rail line and then rail units on it. That feels a little funny to me. I'd like to look that up, actually, because I think that feels like I'm cheating. So you have to be on an operative rail line under your control, but it doesn't really indicate that the entire rail line had to be operative. So unless I'm mistaken here, I don't think that there's any indication that you can't just build the rail line ahead of your unit. That feels a little goofy, and I might want to house rule that out of the way. But I've been playing with it. With it that way, the engineers become almost pointless. If you're clever enough to put your engineers at the front, which I never do, they can rebuild the track without much trouble in front of you. But there's also the rail limit to how many units can transport by rail. I do a significant amount of it. I haven't been keeping count anymore. I don't want to count on being able to rail up to necessarily every location, and I could not, no matter what, rail into areas where the enemy is present. Nor could I move into those after railing. So, for the most part, one could kind of ignore the engineers in the rail building situation and just say, well, if I've got the rails there and they're kind of clean and everything, it'll all work okay. And that really is largely what I do. Also got some of the headquarters kind of slowed up as they're rebuilding units and preparing to throw them back into the line. So for the most part, the Allied offensives have stopped. The Brits, they don't want to sacrifice more men for no gain. When they were gaining ground, that's great, but at this point they don't feel like they're going to get that. Now, of course, not too much longer before the German assault troops come into play. In fact, some of them are already here in the mountains. I don't want to make an attack with them because the first turn of an attack by assault units is very devastating. They could actually break large segments of the line or several different locations along the line at once, which feels a lot more effective than just piddling an attack here. After that first turn, they're no longer really like tanks. Well, they're not really like tanks. On the first turn, they just kind of negate the defensive benefits, even of trenches, etc. After that first turn, defense in depth becomes such a reality immediately, in a way that, like, yeah, it was already somewhat a situation, but it immediately, 4 days, defense in depth becomes such a proposal that you do not have that advantage anymore after one turn. And in fact, trenches become a significant barrier once again. The only thing that isn't is terrain. If you have enough assault units involved, enough assault strength points, which is only the points above the top of the normal 8-point unit. So a 12-5 has 4 assault strength points. If you have as many as the opponent has, then you can of the assault points as the opponent has defensive strength, then you can force the defender to retreat from non-trench hexes. This is nowhere near as effective as what tanks do. The first turn of the assault units is more effective, but the second turn and thereafter becomes much, much less effective at gaining ground. I'm not sure about how I agree with that. We'll see how it works out. They certainly work a lot better in La Grande Guerre, but this may be a more historical treatment of them. Alright, and although the Allied assault has ended over here, in the Metz region, they launched a massive attack here. They got hosed. 11 losses for them, 19 for the 11 losses for the Germans, 19 for the French. That's not a good trade-off at all. This was really, again, one of those situations where I didn't realize how much the Germans had there and hit it anyway. You kind of say, well, geez, you're supposed to pay attention to these things. Yeah, I saw a big stack, but, you know, once it was committed, I again said, let's attack! I really do want that hex. I want it badly because then I can start bombarding this with more effectiveness, perhaps, or punching through to the Tsar or whatever. So in a sense, there's an attritional value. I just didn't realize how painful it was going to be and how bad this was. Didn't throw the tanks in this time. They were present, but they didn't fight the battle because they would take additional losses. But also, they don't really help in clear terrain. If you got a lot of tanks, they help. But they only really help with the trenches, because in order to force a unit to retreat with tanks, you have to add the tanks in and match their overall strength. So there would have been multiple ways to retreat, but the easiest to force a retreat would be simply to hit half the total points. And I came close with 11. Only 3 more and it would have worked. But I don't think it was possible, actually. Now the French set themselves up busting into this hex using the mobile attack rolls for an assault on this, but when they started counting the odds, they said no good. Instead, they moved up this way, which is in the direction they want to go anyway. This being drawn into the Vosges just didn't sound pleasant at all. And there was just a lone headquarters and some replacements here. They drove the replacements out, overran the headquarters. And they're really pushing into the area where the value is. The Germans have to do something about this. This is turning ugly to them. Well, the Germans made an attempt. They surrounded this space to attack it. Missed by 1 strength point in terms of damage, didn't drive it off, took more damage than they gave. I don't remember, something like 8 to 10 or something like that. And now it looks open. It looks like the French can do some really nasty stuff. First of all, this is no longer... no, it is protected now because it's back there. But yeah, this could spell the beginning of some real painful times for the Germans. Okay, and the French continue. Massive, massive attack. They only ended up doing 15 damage. It would have been 22 otherwise. But pretty much they wiped out the entire German stack either way, including artillery that was there. Pushed into here. They first did a mobile attack across here and then did a surrounded attack. There was no trench there anyway. By getting here, they destroyed the river line advantage, and they really have rung the Germans' bell here. I don't know if the Germans can hold this line here. They're going to try to push out, I think, and try to contain somehow to try the Saar Valley from falling into French hands. That would be pretty major. The French, on the other hand, are pretty much out of supply. Not entirely. They still got enough. They could probably push another attack if there's something of value. The Germans, alternatively, might also be attacking this hex again. This is particularly weak, only 6 strength points, no defensive advantages, really. That could help tighten up their line a little bit. But it's really getting ugly, real ugly for the Germans in that front. Well, the worst deformity was pushed back by the Germans, but they still are in a risky position here. I don't know if the French can break through again up here or in this direction, or if they'll just take a pass. And the German front over here is just dissolving. The French retook their territory. The English, on the other hand, you might think, well, maybe they want to make one of their kind of low odds, high casualty attacks. They're having a hell of a time trying to get their front together, because now that they've chewed it up so much and gotten some advances, it's really hard for them to swap troops in and out the way they're used to doing, what they were doing when they could maintain their assaults. They're having a tough time. They want to send a landscaping crew in and fix this damaged terrain. Between that and the nightmare of all the stacks looking for pieces, because they have a much higher incidence of non-British units. The French have a few non-French units, and I just basically say fuck them. You know, if I can't recuperate them, I'll just deal with that. And you know, I've got like a replacement over here kicking around. I don't know. There's probably somebody hurt somewhere I could fix, but I can't fix these green guys, and it's the green guys I need replacements for, and I don't think I have any of them. But even weak French units are pouring into here. I've got enough damaged French that I should be recuperating units, and I probably ought to stack some stuff to take advantage of that. Same could happen with the English, as a matter of fact. I've got damaged English units, damaged German units. Everything's knocked out of the battlefield. But, I don't know. Sometimes it's hard work. The English are able to recuperate their weaker units and bring them back in. They've got enough pieces on the board as it stands. Although if they take more of the front and push the French a little further, the French are kind of still stretched. We'll see. The tightening of the line helped both sides. It definitely helped the offensive side of the Allies, because they can now concentrate a full force attack. Of course, they're concentrating against stronger Germans in general over here, so it becomes unlikely to look good. But over here, they found the weak spot, and they started hitting it. And, you know, okay, that's my fault. I could have spread out better. But I really didn't realize how weak this was going to be and how easily it would fall once the French could hit it with sustained effort. Anyway, we're at the end of the month, which means more supplies coming in, so the assault and this great offensive can continue for maybe another week or so. We'll see. But it is really ugly for the Germans right now.